Welcome on behalf of the Church in the 21st Century Center. My name is Karen Kiefer, and we are very excited about the conversation tonight. We are celebrating 20 years as a center, and our mission is to be a catalyst and a resource for the renewal of the church. And we do a lot of that in conversation, because conversation matters. And this particular event was actually born out of our advisory board at the center. So we have a steering committee and an advisory committee. And we have subcommittees on the advisory committee. And one of the subcommittees is the Catholic intellectual tradition. And so the members of the subcommittee said that they wanted to start to work on this event that would get actually more people engaged in the conversation about navigating institutions and how you can actually put your faith at work and what that looks like. So here we are, navigating institutions today, integrating values and faith in your work. We call this the Dream Team. It's an all-star panel. But we also, before we begin, want to thank our co-sponsors, which Joe DuPont and the Career Center, thank you so much. And also the Boston College Alumni Association. Thank you so much. It's an important conversation for all of us. So I'm going to turn everything over to my friend and colleague, Andrew. Also, too, you might have a bio sheet, and you can see everything that these four panelists have done in their careers. So take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, Karen, very much. So as Karen mentioned, the idea for this panel was born out of our subcommittee on Catholic intellectual tradition. Catholic intellectual tradition defined broadly meaning kind of the way that, really meaning finding God in all things and bringing all things into conversation with our questions of ultimate meaning. And we were convicted on our subcommittee that the Catholic intellectual tradition could be a resource for helping us think about how do we integrate our values with institutional settings that we're a part of. And so that was the origins of this conversation. And so we thought we would broaden it up a little bit wider, just to think more broadly about how we think about our values, and when we leave BC, how those values may or may not match the institutional settings we find ourselves in life and in work. And so we have our panel here to discuss, in a couple of rounds of questions, that very question. And so the first question I'd like to ask them is to each introduce yourself very briefly and give our audience a sense of who you are, your occupation, and what kind of experience you might bring to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Sarah Hansman. I graduated Boston College in 2018 I majored in theology and minored in higher ed. And then I think I'm here because I graduated and then I went into the world of tech sales for 4 years, so went straight into the corporate world out of the Jesuit space. And then just this past year, I came back to Boston College, left the corporate world altogether, and returned to theology. So I am the first year at the School of Theology and Ministry getting my Master's of Divinity. So unclear where that will lead me next, but have done a little bit of navigating of both spaces.
Andrew, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Wesner, and I teach business law in the Carroll School of Management. And I direct the Summer Catalyst program, which is a program for liberal arts students, or any student not in management. It's an 8-week summer program, a kind of business boot camp. I am an attorney, but I only practice, here and there. I have my doctorate in educational leadership from Boston College, and I co-chair C21, the advisory committee of C21, and I serve on the committee with Andrew and Karen and our great staff here, Lynn, Mike, I see Mike. And so I worked early in my career as a lawyer, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, and how we navigate coming out of the program at BC, where we form you to be men and women for others, and then some of you graduate and leave here and you're not finding a culture where you see that every day. So we're going to talk about that stuff tonight, so it's great to be here.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with good friends, people I've known for years, and to see lots of friends and students, and former students. And And hello to anybody who's here on Zoom. My name's Kerry Cronin. I am a professor of the practice in the philosophy department here at BC. I've been here at BC, working at BC since 1995, but I was an undergrad and a grad student here. So I know this institution. I've been navigating this institution for a long time. I am the associate director of the Perspectives program, which is an interdisciplinary program here at BC, and for years I was involved with the C21 Advisory Committee. That was great work. The committee does fantastic work, and I'm delighted to be here for this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Tom. And Sarah, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Andrew Davis, and I'm a professor of theology in the School of Theology and Ministry, and I've been here at BC for 9 years. So thanks for the introductions. To get us started, could I ask each of the panelists, each of you, to maybe describe a time in your life when you found your own values maybe in tension with your institutional setting, and how did you navigate that tension, and what were some resources that you found helpful for navigating that tension?
Okay, I'm up. My experience is probably more recent. So as I mentioned, I studied theology here. I jokingly called myself a retreat addict and a campus ministry kid. When I was here, I did everything I possibly could under the sun that was Jesuit. I loved it. I soaked it all up. And my plan when I graduated was I had applied to JVC to do a year of service, and then I had applied to the School of Theology and Ministry to go to school. And I had some wise people in my life say, hey, you're so deep in this space. You've never taken a business class, you've never had an internship. Maybe you should try that and make sure you actually want to go back to school. School will always be there, you can always go back, but go try out that world. So I went to the job I could find senior spring. I worked at Dell Technologies in sales and sales training, and did a sales training program through them. So needless to say, it was a huge culture shock. In a lot of ways, it was great. I am totally competitive. I'm totally a people person, and sales in a lot of ways fit me. But it was a very different culture. Very, I would say, bro-y. Typical footballs being thrown around the office. Also more toxic, I would say like sexist and homophobic jokes and kind of stuff being thrown around that I really struggled with. And then just a deeply competitive culture. Like we were stack ranked every single day. They made a list of who's at the top and who's at the bottom. So while there was a lot good, I was struggling with how I think Tom said it well. It felt like leaving Boston College, you can go change the world and do your year of service and go commit your life to like a helping profession, or you can go into the corporate world and be successful. So I struggled a lot with this integration. And I will admit, I took some time and probably sat in silence and tension for a while. But eventually I would say like two main things that I did in the corporate world that were helpful for me. First was kind of starting with myself and grounding myself in like what my values were. So the late Father Michael Himes was a huge influence for me here. And in every deck, PowerPoint, we called it decks, I ever did in an interview, I put his 3 key questions. What brings you joy? What are you good at? Who does the world need you to be in them? Because I just thought, I had someone ask me like, why are you doing this? And I think my answer was, it was reminding me, what I cared about and the little ways every single day I could live out my values. So I started to be more comfortable with my few female peers talking about imposter syndrome, and found that every time I did and every time I lived into those values, I had people say, oh my gosh, me too. And that was super grounding. So then once I kind of built up my own confidence, I said, okay, what if I kind of start putting this out there? What if I start bringing this to the people in my organization? And I was in management at that time, and started saying to my peers, what are we doing with this culture? And was crazy enough to say, you know what? I am going to run what I called was a Brene Brown workshop for my team of maybe 12, 30-year-old men who had never been in the Jesuit space and never had these conversations. And leading up to it, I was like, this is a great idea. This is awesome. I'm so brilliant for doing this. And the morning of, I remember thinking, what did you get yourself into? Like, no one is going to receive this. You're trying to talk about values and rumbling with vulnerability with these salesmen, like when it clearly the mighty dollar reigns. But I think what I found that day was people were very, very willing to accept it, and actually, like, it almost fed this desire that they had, which I found out after. So those are just like two small examples of how I tried to bring it into the corporate world, and I think my takeaways for it was, one, every time, it wasn't gonna be given to me, but every time I brought it out, people were welcoming it with open arms. And then second, I had a friend to me when I was grappling with, should I go back to school, should I not, who was very faithful, say to me, I think this is way more outside of your comfort zone than anything in the world of ministry would have been. And in a way, you're touching people who would have never heard these things outside of the space. So those were just a few ways that I grounded myself in the tension. The tension was always there, but I think it was a constant reminding myself of how can I live this out in the normal, boring, everyday life of the corporate world.
So I was thinking as you were sharing, Sarah, being an undergrad at BC, right? I was fortunate to go to a Jesuit high school, Boston College High School. And all of the questions that are asked right on the applications, and we have some student admission program folks here, the reflective element to get access to a Jesuit school, right? I mean, these questions are really difficult. What is Magus? And you're 17, and it's winter break, and it's Christmas Day, and you have to answer this very complex question, right? And why Jesuit education, right? And who are you, and who do you want to become? And these really grand questions. And thinking about going from a Jesuit high school into Boston College, where retreats, you said there's retreats, there's kairos, and students come back and talk about thin spaces and finding God in all things, and this is in our DNA at Boston College. And there are other questions, right, Maddie, we could ask, like, what are the other essay questions? They're tough to answer. And part of the reflective process at BC for undergraduates is to really think about your role in the world and to be setting everyone's sights really high about what's possible in their lives and what they're called to do. And then you leave here and you say, whoa, right? And so I had that kind of moment after 8 years of Jesuit ed. And then I worked for a little bit, and then I went to law school and joined a law firm. And at that point, I had checked off a lot of the boxes in terms of the career track boxes that, we often focus on that would make our parents proud, maybe, right? Or I checked off that box and it would sound good at my reunion. I have an advanced degree, or I'm a practicing attorney. And I worked at a firm where, and this is common, and I see some parents in the room, right? And we have alumni online. You have to bill every 6 minutes. So you have a timesheet next to you. And every 6 minutes you have to bill somebody for that time, all day long, 8 or 9 hours a day. And the firm is looking for more billable hours. And I started to think, like, and some of the people at the firm went to BC, great people, a great firm, but I started to think, like, this is gonna wear on me. This is wearing on my soul. I just can't see. July 3rd, did you get 10 hours in, July 5th, did you get 10? Well, you needed 12 that day because you took the 4th off. So you don't dare take the whole 4th off, And you're billing insurance companies every 6 minutes. And I said, where's the mission integration here, And finding God in all things. I'm not feeling that kind of vibe here, And that's very common in the world of work when you graduate from a Jesuit school or a college anywhere. Work is not always fun, and it's not always joyful, And sometimes you have these low points of your career maybe where you can find yourself. In one hot summer day, I found myself and I said, I'm out of here. Now, I wasn't married and I didn't have children, And so I didn't have the responsibilities at that point of a mortgage, so I had the freedom to leave. But, you know, I was navigating a workplace that wasn't bringing me joy. I met a career objective, which was important, and I was making money, but I didn't see myself doing that. And so I went to the managing partner, and it wasn't an act of heroism, it was just, you know, I need to make a change, you know, and I didn't know quite what I was going to do, but I needed to go somewhere else. And then I, you know, found my way back into education and into school again, into school life, and then into teaching, where, you know, hopefully for our students, you know, and our seniors who are rising up into the world of work, and our undergrads who are still in formation, we can nudge you to the Father Himes questions, you know, because if you can find that what you're good at, what you have a gift for, also makes you happy and it meets the world's needs, you're answering those questions. You know, are you good at it? Does it bring you joy? And does the world want you to do that? Will someone pay you for that, right? That's where your will is converging maybe with the vocation, you know, and God's will at some level. And then you're happy because you're free. There's interior freedom when you're doing something that you really feel called to do. And it's not because your aunt likes to say that you do this or it sounds good on social media, you know. We didn't have it. Sarah reminded us that you're a recent grad, by the way, a few minutes ago. I picked up on that. We're not recent grads.
Hey.
But we didn't have social media.
Much more wisdom.
Well, we didn't have social, so it's much harder to keep up on social than it was for us. We could follow our own path in life a little bit, free of the concern about all of our Facebook friends or something, which adds a whole nother dimension, you know? So that's kind of my short spiel there.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, guys. When we were thinking about this question of sort of navigating these different spaces that we've been in, different institutions, I started thinking about this, and I realized that the two institutions that I've been in literally my whole life from day one, or a negative 9 months, are my family and the Roman Catholic Church. And my family is wonderful and fallible and loud and big and Irish and Catholic. And I grew up with several uncles who were priests, so I often say at my house, if you waited around long enough, like mass would break out, and so it was part of my life in really comprehensive ways. So when I was thinking about this question of navigating the joys and the tensions of living in institutions, I thought I could talk about my family, but they're kind of wacky, so I'll skip them. And I thought about a time when I was in my 40s, in the early 2000s, when news started coming of the sex scandals in my church. It was an incredibly difficult time for me. Now, these stories were horrifying, and I was so aware that what was hard for me was nothing compared to the horrors that people had suffered, and the thousands of people who had been abused by the people that they had every right to trust the most in their lives. And this was really a very rocky time, because dealing with the kind of tension of, wait a minute, what are we doing in this church, in this institution, was really a very live question. Around that time, or shortly thereafter, I don't think it was long after, which was really hard, my parish was going also through, for those of you who remember, I'm aware that my students weren't even born at this time, which sort of blows my mind. At this time, the Diocese of Boston, like many dioceses, were asking parishes to merge and close, and I was serving on my parish council, and I remember we were working with the pastor, who is an incredible person, just a really loving and kind and humble, wonderful priest. And he was working with the parish council, and we were being called to merge our parishes. And the sex scandals were sort of the noise in the background of this horror. And I remember at one point, at a meeting of the parish council, many people on our council were saying, well, the church is totally corrupt, so let's just buy this parish and run it ourselves. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, is that a thing? Are we going to do that? What would that mean? What is that about, to sort of react to what's going on and all this pain and all this woundedness and suffering by deciding that we would know better and we could do better? And I remember looking at the pastor and thinking, I wish he would just make the decisions. I wish he would just tell us all to go home and make the decisions, like priests have always done in my life. And then it hit me. It really hit me at that time that I was part of an institution that I wasn't accounting for. It was an invisible institution to me. It was an institution of clericalism, whereby I just assumed that I just wanted the clergy to do all the work, that the church was not me. It was something I went to on Sundays, and sometimes for daily mass, and sometimes for meetings where they would ask me to do some things, but that I really wanted the church to run things, and then I would just come by and grab what I needed and then go home. And I realized I had to face at that point, I thought what I was dealing with in facing the sex scandals was, these were really horrifying things that had happened and that people had done, people other than me. And what I had to realize and live in the tension of and navigate was, this is me. This church is me, and I'm part of what happened. And it was a really hard place to be. It was a really tumultuous place to be, because it had been, just like my family, an institution that nurtured and created me to a large degree. So I remember facing that was really hard. And one of the great consoling pieces in that, and then I'll be quiet, was remembering something that Bert Howell, who we all, many of us know, Bert Howell once said about the Jesuits. Now, if you know Bert Howell, if you've ever met Bert Howell, he runs the Intersections, he's director of the Intersections program here at BC, and he is a wonderful, wonderful man who is just so wise. And he once said, here's the thing about the Jesuits and Jesuit spirituality. Jesuits are very comfortable in tension, sort of living in the tension of things not being as they should and wanting them to be as they should be. And that Jesuits are very comfortable sort of leaning into that tension and accompanying each other in the places where we realize it's not right. We need to change. We need to ask ourselves questions. We need to face things. And that was a really consoling thing. I had Bert Howell sort of sitting on my shoulder through that time, as well as wonderful friends to be in conversation with, to navigate those hard times.
Thanks very much, all of you, for those reflections. To piggyback on to sort of what you were just saying, Kerry, I was thinking, what you were describing, Bert's comments about the Jesuits being good at living into that tension, I feel like in some ways that is the best of what the Catholic intellectual tradition offers. I feel like here at BC, and really in the entirety of the Catholic tradition, I think you can find examples of the church living into that tension. And I think that here at BC, if we're doing our job correctly in the classroom and other parts of the university life, I think we're inviting students to live into that tension. And so I think one way to think about the transition from Boston College to life and work after BC is to think about the ways that your BC experience has stretched you and asked you to live into this tension, and to recognize that whatever takes place after BC is going to be something that you've been prepared for here in your different experiences in the classroom and beyond. So with that in mind, I wanted to maybe zero in on, ask our panelists to reflect a little bit more on what were some resources that you found in these times of tension. What were resources from your time at BC or other parts of your life that were helpful as you were navigating?
So I think I talked in the first section a little bit about what I felt in tension, but I think even as I grew more into and grew more comfortable existing in that tension or living into my values in a space that perhaps didn't quite align with me, I still felt a lot of what Tom's referring to as a lack of meaning in his job. And I moved to Pittsburgh 2 years ago and had started a new field sales job. I worked entirely remote. Every single person I worked with was at least 20 years older than me. And I felt maybe living into my values, but I did not feel that meaning. And those 3 key questions were just feeling really sparse. And I think I had a moment, I said to myself right before I moved, like this image of the frog in the boiling pot, and the frog's just sitting there, and the water gets turned up, and it doesn't realize like it's eventually boiling to death. And I think I was so fearful leaving Boston, which has been my home for my entire life. In Boston College, I said, I'm going to forget everything that I ever came to know and love. And so I was reminded, though, from a few people that your work is not the only institution that you are or can be a part of. And I think it's easy at Boston College, which in an amazing way, everything is accessible in this one space. And I could go from my classes that were asking me difficult questions to a coffee date or an Emmaus walk with someone I knew, to a retreat, to an amazing talk, and it was just all there. And I really had to go seek it out myself when I was leaving home and I was all alone. And so I thought about what other institutions can I draw on? What other places can I find this meaning? It doesn't necessarily just have to be in my day job. And so I moved to Pittsburgh, and I think I drew upon 2 main things. So first was I started working for a nonprofit on the side. I said, I did all these things at school. Why am I not doing these things now? And so I did a lot of research. I thought about what I cared about, and I started working for this organization. Granted, it is Boston-based, but the Women's Foundation of Boston. And I was actually they were a very new nonprofit, started in 2018, and I was able to take actually my business skills. I ran Salesforce for them. I did almost sales and development things for them, but I was able to aim it towards an organization that I cared deeply about, which is their mission is only 1.8%, I'm going to pitch them, only 1.8% of all philanthropic giving goes to women and girls, and 40% of that 1.8 goes overseas. And so their mission is to move that needle and increase the philanthropic giving to women and girls. So I got to actually use my business skills towards this mission that I cared deeply about. And I found a lot of meaning in that at times when I wasn't finding it in my job. And then the second space was my faith. It was so deep here, and even when I lived in Boston immediately after graduating, there's a church downtown that I think almost everyone knows about, St. Cecilia's, that became my home. And then I was moving to this new place, and I always felt like I could rely on the Jesuit presence. And in Pittsburgh, there is no Jesuit presence. There are no Jesuit high schools, there are no Jesuit colleges. And I felt, oh man, I started church shopping, as I say, and was just really struggling, and ended up finding there is a community called the Sisters of St. Joseph, and they were founded within the Ignatian tradition. And there was a community of sisters that lived about 30, 40 minutes away from me. And I found them in searching to do, in the Ignatian tradition, there's something called the spiritual exercises, which are for Jesuits, or a 30-day long silent retreat, really walking in the footsteps of St. Ignatius and how he built his spirituality. And they have one for people who can't take 30 days off called the 19th Annotation. And I found these incredible sisters were offering the 19th Annotation for anyone who wanted to do it. And I was alone in this place, and I said, the Spirit's calling me to do this. And so I spent a year. It's 30 to 45 minutes of prayer every day. It's a week meeting with a spiritual director every week. And I think the Jesuits really do offer a good space of tension. It was not only a space to rekindle and grow a personal faith of my own, separate from Boston College, but it was also a space in the everyday to continue discernment about my vocation, about my relationships, about my friendships. It really, I think there's value. I want to do the 30 days, but I think there's value in doing it in the everyday, because again, back to like the boring and the stupid, unsexy things, I was discerning in the little ways every day, and found this community of sisters that I would have never thought that I still stay in touch with. And so I think, again, it goes back to, it's so wonderful that you have access to these things at Boston College, but it's much harder. I struggled with seeking it out on my own, and but when you do seek, there are wonderful institutions. And so I think the Jesuits have maintained, even though it existed in the Sisters of St. Joseph, the Jesuit spirituality has been something that has grounded me in my faith, been a resource for me, discerning the little things. My friends will joke, I'm discerning everything. I'm discerning if I'm having Diet Coke today. I am discerning. Everything is discernment for me. So, but it really has been built into my blood of feeling the Spirit in my everyday and discerning that. And that's something I found outside of Boston College and in institutions that I weren't expecting. So that's me.
Sarah's term, discernment is something that we value here so much, and reflection. And those go to and speak to the examined life, right? We want to live examined lives and, be people of conscience and faith. And part of our work in C21, an essential piece of our work is to pass on our faith and to companion with our students and the young people, and as a Jesuit Catholic university, we want our students to know that there's something that distinguishes the DNA of this institution, right? That's in the ground in this academy, in this university, and that we want our students, and we want to be different in some way. We want to ask that ultimate question of how will they know, right? How will those we work with, our friends, our colleagues, no matter where we go, how will they know that we went to Boston College and were trained to do different things and to see different things, And discernment, that as part of that examined life, that's a constant inquiry. And, I think managing around finding work to be work and challenging, work's not always joyful, Even if we do what we love, grading's not always joyful, right? But asking that question, is this going to lead to something better? And there's that learn, earn, return model that I think is important in managing expectations as well. You have to be realistic. Work is work. They call it work for a reason. And it's not always going to feel joyful, but to be always asking, is this meeting my deepest needs? Am I able to be who I am, in this workplace, in this culture? And sometimes the answer is no. But maybe you need the job, and maybe having that job for a few years, that earning period, is going to let you pay off loans and buy a house or buy a condo or do some good things with some of them. Education debt is good debt. Starting a family, paying for private schools, all the responsibilities that can come with parenting, and so we don't want to be overly idealistic and say, well, you're all going to go out and be hired because you're faith-filled creatures. And you're not going to be hired, to share your faith with the people you work with, at a law firm or anywhere, really. That's unless it's a mission-based institution, and most places are not. So I think managing expectations is important. And knowing when it might be time to leave, to trusting that voice and praying for light. Pray for guidance, pray for light, pray for consolation, and and be open to little signals from people around you, that idea in our faith tradition that I think is really so amazing to think about, how God's presence in our life, that God could actually care about 7 billion people and work through other people to nudge you to kind of find a new direction. To think that God is that active in our lives is overpowering and really awesome, But to think maybe, someone's nudging me, or there's a signal out there coming back to me that I need to leave this place. And I need to make a change. And most of our young people, our gold classes, our recent grads, they're going to have 5 or 6 jobs. You're not indentured servants. We, at BC, want you to be happy and to be fulfilled, and to be able to be at a place where you can be yourself and integrate your faith into what you do and who you are. And sometimes it means, finding that in little ways, in the way you treat people, in a kind of let it begin with me approach, Just be nice to people. Get to know the names of the people that run the elevators up and serve food and clean the offices. And for, BC students typically don't have to do that kind of work. And it's our responsibility to treat everyone as members of our family. And let it begin with me, and you can start to create a culture where people see you differently than others, and you build your own culture instead of waiting for someone else to begin it. So you're empowered creatures with agency, but there is a time to leave, and there is a time to maybe, seek ultimate meaning and purpose after you've, bought a house or tried to provide for your loved ones, if that's the role you're going to play in the world, and if you're fortunate, you might be at a place that has a mission like ours, but most people won't. Most people won't work at a Jesuit school, but will know that they were Jesuit educated, and that will make all the difference.
I think when I was thinking about the resources that I drew on in those particular times of really struggling with sort of my place in an institution, with all its joy and suffering, I guess I can point to 3 things. So I'll try to go through them quickly. First, I realized that, I teach about the Catholic intellectual tradition, so I thought I should look there, and that would be good. And what I realized was that I had to learn a lot in my 40s, apparently. My 50s, big things could happen. I realized that I was thinking that the Catholic intellectual tradition was this pure, wonderful, great time of wisdom that I just needed to reach back to. But then I realized that the Catholic intellectual tradition includes me and my students talking about all these things and looking back and reading along with and thinking along with people who struggled with the issues of their times and the horrors of their times and the joys of their lives, et cetera. So that kind of put me in a different frame of thinking about what the Catholic intellectual tradition is for us and for me and in this conversation that I'm part of with my students. The second piece was that, and this came upon me in prayer at that time, that one of the things, I have a quote from Bernard Lonergan, who's a great figure in my life and in my mind, a theologian, Jesuit theologian. He talks about genuineness and authenticity and how what genuineness demands of us is that we don't run away from hard questions. And I remember praying about that at that time and then making a decision at one point to read as many of the reports of sexual abuse as I could. And it included, I remember I sat for a long time reading the report on Cardinal McCarrick's abuse. And it was really hard to read. It's brutally hard to read what people have gone through and what happened. But I felt that I needed to really sort of honestly face that. because I'm inspired by people in my tradition who have faced really hard things. At that time, I also had started reading a biography of Pope Francis when he was newly minted by Austin Ivory, which is a great biography. It's a bit of a slog, but it's a great book. And in this book, The Great Reformer, he brings up this instance of when Pope Francis was the director of the novices when he was a young Jesuit. And one of the things that really impressed me that Ivory reported on is that when he took over as director of the novices' education, he realized that the novices would study in the morning and then go out into the neighborhoods in the afternoon. And he thought that was wrong, and so he reversed it. And he would have the Jesuit novices go out into the neighborhoods in the morning for a few hours, and then come back and have lunch and discuss everything that they had found out about what's going on in the neighborhoods and what the people needed, and then study in the afternoons, so that they were always studying in light of what people need. And that has made me more determined than ever to always try to understand not just what I'm trying to do, but what people need from me, and that can help me be better at what I do. So those resources have been really wonderfully helpful for me.
Thank you so much to all three of you for those great insights. At this point, we've all talked up here quite a bit. The next step of this evening, we thought, would be to invite you to talk to your neighbor for a few minutes. And so for the next 5 minutes, if you would turn to your neighbor and to share with your neighbor maybe a part of some of the examples or resources shared by the panel, maybe an example from your own life where you found your values in tension with some sort of institutional setting, or what resources you found in navigating those sorts of things. And so talk to your neighbor for the next 5 minutes or so, and then I'd like to call you back and maybe invite you to ask some questions to the panel or share some of the insights from your dyad conversations. Thanks. Thanks. It's telling us some great conversations were taking place in your small groups and pairs. If you're interested, I'd be interested in hearing maybe some of the wisdom that was shared in your dyad conversations. And so if you have some insights you'd like to share with the larger group, or if you have a question for one of the panelists, I invite you to share. I think Eileen has a microphone, so it can be picked up by the camera. Come on down.
Hello? Oh. Okay, so part of our conversation, and this was kind of like on my mind when I was hearing you guys talk about this, was kind of how like these obstacles in like the workplace or even in life can kind of like detract you. And that was kind of something for me, was that I had hard moments in my life that kind of detracted me from faith. And I guess so my question is directed more towards Professor Cronin. In dealing with like that whole scandal that was going on, did that kind of create any kind of disillusionment for you, or maybe like a, like lessen your confidence in the church? And like, if that did, like, how did that affect your conversations of faith with like students and your peers?
Thank you, Gabe, my student, for that question. I'm going to get to you for that one. Okay. Yes, of course. That I don't know anyone who was serious about their faith in the church at that time who wasn't really rocked by that. And there was a period of time where we were all like, what are we doing, right? The realization about my own sort of part in that was actually a really helpful part of my path forward. I had heard all through my life and from professors and the church that I'm the church too, but I didn't think of it that way. I really wanted it to be the church is over there and I go and then I leave. And so it really forced me for the first time to take seriously the question of my being part of an institution that is both completely sinful and completely wonderful, right? And to come to honest terms with that was a project for me. And it was a project that I worked on with wonderful friends. Professor Troxel, who's sitting behind you, is a good friend of mine. With former students, I see some of them up there. With students, with colleagues, with OLs, so I was really lucky to be here in this community and in the community of my family that people wanted to talk about it and to talk honestly about it. And to not run away from the hard questions about it. So I don't know if that answers your question, Gabe. But yes, it was incredibly hard. And yes, the simplicity that's beyond the complexity of loving a fallen institution is the same as the simplicity on the other side of the complexity of loving sinful people. I don't know. I think to me, building institutions is a human activity, but sustaining human institutions is a job for us all. That sounded quotable right there. I just made that up, but write it down. Write that down.
Thank you. Other questions?
We're going to make you run. Yeah.
It's good preparation for this Monday.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, everyone, for being here. It was good hearing all of you. I just have one question, especially for Tom, who I've known for a long time. We used to jog together every day. Don't tell anyone else about that, over at L Street in Southie. But I was wondering if you have read that book called Is Atheism Dead by Metaxas? I studied science, biological sciences, and the more I learned about science, the deeper my faith got. And this book by Metaxas, a Greek guy, Is Atheism Dead? It's quite popular, but are any of you familiar with it?
No, but I'll put it on my list.
Please.
Just a quick comment. Everyone knows Bill. Bill was our main gate attendant out here on Linden Lane for many years, so
Fantastic.
everyone can say hello to Bill. And I didn't read the book, but Bill was a great runner and is a great person. So,
Yes.
good to
I
have
can
you
also
back.
second that. I know Bill because he was always smiling at me whenever I walked down Commonwealth Avenue.
Exactly.
He is the face of Boston College, the
right.
first person you would see. And he also would give out dog treats as well. So if you see those milk bones at the main gate, that's Bill.
So if he says read the book, I'm reading the book.
I'll keep the pressure on Tom. I'm curious, Tom, in your experience as an attorney, I think a lot of, I think this is true of law firms, but also kind of just large organizations in general. When you're talking about mission, I was thinking about the way that a lot of large firms kind of have a mission on their website, oftentimes very sanitized and very kind of broad language. And then sometimes you'll see large corporations either make decisions that seem to contravene those principles, or they'll take positions on a social issue that you kind of deeply disagree with. So I'm just wondering if there's a time during your legal practice where maybe that came up, or kind of as you observe things today, if there's a way that you suggest people coming out of an institution where they're maybe more likely to affiliate themselves with the mission, kind of how people might think about that in a different way when they leave a place or join a community that they're not so likely to agree with all the time.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question, and it's one that I've thought about, that we all will continue to think about. And if you go to law school, you'll have a chance to think about. You are going, aren't you? Do we know where yet?
Yeah, another Catholic school in the Midwest.
I think we know it. Congratulations. And so, again, I think that in law, the idea is that there's a wall of separation, right? Jefferson's wall between church and state. And it is not a theocracy that we live in, And so I think a corporate mission statement, a corporation has a right to draft and live out its own mission, But tensions will emerge. I think that the natural, one of the beauties of law, just because you're directing that toward me, and I did study law and am a lawyer, is the power of advocacy, where you can be a voice, provide a voice to people that are seeking a just outcome. A person or a cause you can represent and take to the bar, take to a court, and file a legal complaint, file a lawsuit or represent someone. And I connect that to the men and women for others, the advocacy part of it. If men and women for and with others means anything, it means advocating and being an advocate. And so you don't have to necessarily wear your faith on your sleeve to do that. You have a license to do that, right, by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts here or another Commonwealth or state jurisdiction. But I really believe that type of work integrates well with our mission at BC toward the common good and to advancing the plight of the needy, and that kind of work can be inspiring and good. And yet you're going to run into resistance, because you're not there to be an ambassador of Boston College. You're there to be a zealous advocate, of the firm and of the client. But again, you can be collegial in your competitiveness with other attorneys and with people in your firm. You can work well with and, be a light in the firm, a guiding light kind of person. And we know all of you try and will be that kind of practitioner. And we know you're going to be that type of practitioner.
Maybe time for one more. I don't know if down here in the front.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you just for your insights. It certainly meant a lot to me personally and to all of us here. Us four in the front row who you know a lot. All four of us are seniors, and we were just talking about how to carry on what we've learned from Boston College, what we've cherished so much throughout 4 years, into 4 totally different paths that may all have some sort of a common thread of Jesuit goodness. But Sarah, this might be a little bit more directed toward you because you've graduated a bit more recently, but what advice do you have for seniors who are leaving this place trying to hold on to the values as much as we can? I know you mentioned the 3 questions in your presentation, but just ways that you hold on to the values of Boston College in your daily life post-grad.
Did you hear that? Recent. Yeah, I feel so deeply like this time, spring, senior year, like I was horrified. I thought I was the biggest fan of Boston College to ever exist, and I thought my whole life is going to come crumbling down, and all these things. And I have my 5-year reunion this May, and I think the things that I lost were not the things that I thought I was going to lose. I lost a lot of friends that I thought were good friends, and I maintained friends who were maybe not the people I were expecting, but were the people, a lot of one-on-one relationships that could really sustain me and sustain the other. So I think I was really surprised by that. I think I was nervous about losing my faith, and it's vibrant as ever. So I think I surprised myself a lot with what happened in the years to come. Do I have a piece of advice for seniors? I think it's that, Kerry said I was an orientation leader, and they used to play this video, and every single Sunday they would have, all the kids come in, and they play this video about like the power of a Jesuit education, and like, why do I still know every line in the video? I don't know, and I found it, I somehow got access to it, and it's in my Google Drive, saved to my personal Google Drive. I don't know if that's allowed, but sometimes I go back and watch it. And I'll have to quote Michael Himes again, because like what he has said so many times has like really stayed with me. But he says, the measure of the success of a Jesuit education or of Boston College is the degree to which all of those who didn't get to come to Boston College live lives that are richer, truer, fuller, braver. I'm not going to be able to do it as well as he would have, but that really stuck with me. And I think what I tried to do that would work in any, I know where you're all going, and I think no matter where you are, you're touching people, and if you're grounded in your Jesuit faith or the values you care about, whether that's parts of the Jesuit tradition or questions that Boston College asked you, you can bring those things anywhere. You do not, yes, I didn't talk about going back to divinity school because, not that it's not relevant, but you don't need to go to divinities. That was my path. That was the path I discerned. But I don't think you need to go to divinity school to live these things out every day. And I think it's the reminder, however it is, if it's the journaling in the morning, or if it's the quote you go back to, or sticking a sticky note on your mirror, or whatever the little things, or listening to the podcast that remind you of these things. I really do. It's knowing that you can do that wherever you are, and in ways you're touching people that would never have the ability to go to Boston College, and like making that your mission. I know all of you will, but.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's a great point to end on. Could you please join me in thanking Sarah, Tom, and Kerry for all the wisdom they shared?